Hello everyone, my name is Matt DeLaCluse. I'm the General Manager of RAECO Rents. I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for Intro to Benzene Detection and Monitoring. Our presenter today is Werner Hagg from Ion Science. This 45-minute free webinar, he will cover the following: why benzene detection and monitoring is important, regulations regarding benzene exposure and monitoring, primary applications for benzene detection, best practices for portable benzene detection and monitoring, common measurement problems or concerns, how Ion Science products help make benzene detection and measurement easy, and then Ask the Expert. We'll have questions answered at the end. Werner Hagg serves as a Senior Applications Chemist at Ion Science USA. He has 20 years of experience in the gas detection industry. He is the author of the PID Handbook, Theory and Applications of Direct Reading Photoionization Detectors. We thank him for taking time to share his knowledge during this exclusive session of our customers. Because of the large number of attendees, we'll be muting the phone lines. If you have any questions, there's a question chat tool in the GoToWebinar. Please enter your questions and we will make sure to get it answered. Now I'd like to turn the microphone over to Werner. Welcome.
Yeah, hi, I hope everybody can hear me. So welcome to this talk about benzene-specific monitoring. Can everybody see that? And
I just made you the presenter, so now you can go ahead and present your slide.
Okay, so not sure. All right,
there it is.
A little bit, are we good here? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
A little bit about me. I studied chemistry at MIT and then studied environmental chemistry at the University of Tennessee, and worked for about 10 years in basic research in environmental chemistry. I've worked at not only Ion Science but at RAE Systems, so I have a pretty good background on these benzene monitoring techniques from different manufacturers. And the products I'll talk about today are all from Ion Science, but the ones from RAE are somewhat similar. And I help to build those also. So this talk can be taken as general and not necessarily specific to Ion Science, although there are some particular things that are advantages for this Ion Science product. To get to the benzene applications, benzene is found in lots of locations in oil refineries, particularly for petrochemical plants. Any place that stores, uses, or distributes gasoline or benzene, including these refineries, offshore installations, fracking operations, coke works. We had some people wanting to use them in natural gas condensate, where liquids collect in natural gas pipelines, and there is a little bit of benzene in there. In ABS plastic manufacturing. We recently had a request from U.S. Steel. This is their light oil coming from the coking operations, containing a large fraction of benzene. Then there's other solvents like toluene and naphthalene and xylene around in these coking operations, and these could interfere with the measurement of benzene because they have similar chemical properties, and would be detected on a lot of instrumentations like the FIDs and PIDs that are broadband detectors. So in refinery, the interest comes across the board from health and safety personnel, from hazmat people, and from environmental compliance. There's been a recent new rule, EPA 2015 final rule requiring fence line monitoring at refineries at 12 to 24 locations every 2 weeks in order to avoid exposure to the nearby. I don't know if you can see this on my cursor, but here's a nearby neighborhood, and they're requiring, there's a refinery, they're requiring monitoring around the fence line at various locations. This monitoring is due to take effect in early of next year. By then, refineries need to have these systems installed. Later that month, they need to start collecting data, reporting those data to EPA, continue reporting on a quarterly basis, and need to compare their results to the annual average of 9 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, not only do they have to report that to EPA, but the EPA is going to make this public, and so it's critical that these refineries have good data, and from their point of view, they want to be able to demonstrate that data are showing low benzene emissions crossing their fence line. So anything they can do to avoid any benzene released early on before it reaches the fence line, or detect any benzene emitting from any of their processes is of advantage to them in order to get to solve the problem early on. And that's where our measurement tools come in. So the 9 micrograms per cubic meter is 3 parts per billion, and so it's quite a low measurement technique required. It's been estimated that the annual sampling costs for activated carbon sampling could be $40,000 to $100,000 per year if you're doing biweekly sampling. And so if we can reduce that with instrument measurements, that will be definitely a cost benefit. And if you can demonstrate that your levels are less than 3 ppb on an average basis, then you can move from biweekly to monthly, quarterly, and eventually semi-annual, and finally annual sampling. So again, anything that you can do to help reduce or understand where your benzene is coming from and reduce those emissions is going to give you some cost savings. Why is benzene so important? Well, it's one of the most toxic chemicals in a lot of these fuels compared to other aromatics. It has a very low ACGIH time-weighted average of 0.5 ppm, and it's a known human carcinogen. The compared to toluene, which is about 100 times more toxic, ethylbenzene, it's about 200 times more toxic. So benzene is one of the most toxic components. If you look at fuels, exposure limits for various fuels, like overall fuels, for diesel fuel it's 12 ppm, and jet fuel it's 30, and gasoline 300. Again, benzene shows up as one of the most toxic components, and we can do a calculation to estimate how much benzene needs to be present in the fuel to control the toxicity, and we can do that with this simple equation. The TWA is just this formula for the fraction of benzene, compare the TWA over benzene and the fraction of gasoline over the TWA of the gasoline. So we've done this calculation, and here are the results presented graphically. Here I've plotted on this x-axis the mole percent of benzene in the gasoline. And I'm sorry, let's go back. This is the percent of the TWA controlled by the benzene, and that's shown by this line right here. Now, so once you get above about 25%, or sorry, 0.25% mole percent of benzene in the gasoline, that now the toxicity of the entire gasoline is 50 or 60% dominated by the benzene, and all the other components are fairly minor. And once you get above about 1%, it's dominated by the benzene, 80%. And so you can almost forget about all the rest of the components that are in the gasoline, and the toxicity is dominated completely by the benzene. Most gasolines and fuels have something in this range right here of, about 1%, 0.5% to 2% of benzene in the gasoline depending on which state you live in or which country. So that's in a region where benzene really dominates the toxicity of the gasoline. So if you were to use a meter that measures just total hydrocarbons, then you wouldn't know whether it has a very low percentage of benzene or a very high percentage of benzene, because that reading would be swamped out by all the other components present. So we really need a technique that'll fish out the benzene from all the other components. This slide illustrates how difficult that could be. Here's a gas chromatogram of a typical gasoline containing all these components. There's typically some 300 components in it, and this one small peak right here is the benzene. Maybe, like I said, 1% or so of the total. You have all these other components, and a broadband detector like an PID or a simple PID would measure almost all of them, and you wouldn't know how toxic the gasoline is because you don't know whether this peak is this large or that large or that large, and that one peak controls the overall toxicity. So this is the solution that has been available on the market now for several years, many years now. A PID with a filtering tube in front of it, and this is the magic tube that isolates the benzene from all the other stuff that's coming in. The way you would use this is to use it without the tube at first, allow the PID to screen for total VOCs, and then if you're once you get a hit for something over half a ppm, then insert a tube here, break open the end, insert the tube, initiate the reading, and then after a minute or two, it'll give you the reading for benzene, and you can tell whether you need to take corrective action or not. Then, if you want to continue on, you can continue on with this tube to go for a 15-minute stell reading. The tubes now, in combination with a fairly low flow of the instrument, allow you to read for 15 minutes or even more in some cases. How does it work? This tries to illustrate how that works. This is a list of the, think of this as the response that you might get with the 10.0 EV lamp. That's the lamp used in the Tiger Select or the Ultra Ray or other these PID tube systems. And if you had no filtering tube, you would get this kind of response for all these components. These compounds with higher ionization energies give almost no response on the 10.0 lamp. And so that's why we use the 10.0 lamp to remove the response to these. And then the tube filters out these heavy alkanes by absorption, and the ones that are lighter that get through the tube, physically get through the tube, or could get through the tube, they are actually oxidized. They are oxidized by the chemical reagents on the tube. And so benzene is just light enough to get through, but also hard enough to oxidize that only the benzene makes it through. When I first saw these, I thought this was impossible, but I was quite amazed when we got these tubes and were able to do this and get just the benzene coming through. There are a few other minor interferences that I'll delve into a little bit later, but it's to me pretty interesting and amazing how well this works to get just the benzene coming through. Another way to use these is to combine them with a little badge type or that you clip onto your shirt. This is the Cub, and this contains just a 10.0 lamp. Allows you to follow the just continuously measure without having the more expensive Tiger Select instrument, without having to carry around the heavier or more expensive instrument. You could put these on each one of, I'm sorry, this keeps moving. Put one of these on each one of the workers, and then if there is an issue, the hygienist can come in with the Tiger Select and make the more specific measurements if you get an alarm. Ion Science calls this the TAC reading, total aromatic compound. So they use this as a continuous screening for TAC. That's their terminology. Just briefly going over the specifications. Again, a 10.0 lamp for benzene-specific measurement, 10.0 lamp with the filtering tube. Detection range, the linear range is given as 0 to 40 ppm, but as we'll see later, you can actually go up to almost 300. Resolution listed is 0.01 ppm, that's 10 parts per billion. The readout is 1 part per billion, but that's probably a more reasonable resolution. The accuracy practically is about 0.05 ppm or 10%, which is 2 or greater. And the measurement time is about 2 minutes, and that depends on the temperature where you're working. I'll describe that a little bit more in a minute. The tubes get discolored. So the sample gas is flowing in this direction on a new tube, an unopened tube. It's this nice orange color. As gases come in, they discolor the tube, this greenish brown color. And you can use the tube until the, find my cursor, until the color reaches this 3/4 mark. Once you can see the color reaching there, there's a chance that the front leading edge of this color change may break through, and you may start getting some breakthrough and interfering in your benzene reading. So the readings will lag the actual concentrations by a minute or two as the benzene works its way through. The benzene doesn't go straight through. There is some absorption, and that's why we need to wait for the 2 minutes to make the measurements, as I'll show here. Depending on the temperature, if you have a 40 degrees C, which is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 104, you got to put a pretty quick response, and you could be done in about a minute. But at more common temperatures of 20, 25 degrees, you're in here. That's about, where the cursor goes, 68, 70 degrees is right in here. We need to wait for 70, 80 seconds. The instrument automatically goes for about 120 seconds just to be sure you're in the flat part of this curve and all the benzene is sort of stabilized. If you are working in cold temperatures, then you need to go maybe as long as 4 minutes if you're down near freezing. The instrument has an automatic, a little, as soon as you insert a tube, it lets you select the temperature so that it'll automatically adjust the time to make an appropriate measurement. Did I go that? Yeah, okay. So this just shows you the linearity. Again, the specs are up to 40 ppm, where it's nice and linear down there. There's a little bit of curvature above that. But it's not bad up to 300. You can still make some pretty good measurements. And if you are trying to do environmental compliance, where sometimes you need to make these higher concentration measurements, it can still work for, say, gas leak detection, LDAR measurements, and that sort of thing. How selective are these tubes? How well do they really filter out other stuff? Well, we challenged the tubes to various other components and measured the readings both at 2 minutes for an instantaneous measurement and a 15-minute after 15 minutes. And we sort of titrated, trying to figure out how much of this component you could tolerate when you're going for a whole 15-minute reading. So for a 2-minute reading, you challenge it with 400 ppm toluene, you get no response, but that will break through after about 2 or 3 minutes, and then you'll start getting false positives. So the maximum for a 15-minute reading is about 100 ppm. For xylene and ethylbenzene, we only tested at 200, but again, you get no response, and the maximum is about 100 for a 15-minute spell. For these alkanes, octanes, there's not much response. Also, none of these things interfere in the instantaneous readings. Hexane is a special case. It can actually suppress the benzene reading a little bit if it's very high concentrations. Pentane will use up the tube but not give a response, nor will butane or methane. Methane is one that you might have in higher concentrations, and this is a typical PID response that up above about 10,000 ppm or 1%, that it will suppress the PID response. So that's nothing to do with the tube. That's just the normal effect of the PID. Further testing with cyclohexane, the RAE tubes they can't even tolerate 10 ppm cyclohexane. You'll have some interference at 10 ppm already. The ion tubes work a little better. They're a little stronger and larger, so they're able to filter out 50 ppm cyclohexane without any effect or suppression. Actually, that's the wrong asterisk. That should be that above that reading you may get some interference. It won't suppress the benzene readings. Isobutylene, again, no effect. Gasoline, well, of course, you're going to see some readings because gasoline contains some benzene, but there's no effect on the benzene response due to the other components present in the gasoline. Other solvents that might be present due to cleaning, your acetone, isopropanol, ethanol, not listed here, but again, those are all absorbed in the tubes, and you can have very high concentrations and still go for over 15-minute spell. Some compounds present in confined space entry situations like H2S and CO also have no effect. They just weren't tested at higher concentrations to know how much they can tolerate. There is some response by trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene, and chlorobenzene. These compounds might be present in a soil that's being remediated. So if you have a soil or groundwater contamination with the chlorinated solvents, then not give you an accurate reading of just the benzene because there's a slight cross-sensitivity to these chlorinated solvents. This shows you, we now took these off to a refinery and did some actual testing on actual samples in a refinery. This was a cooler where they stored samples of refined fuels, diesel and gasoline and various grades, and the total VOC content in here was 90 ppm in the airspace. The TAC reading gives you 10 ppm. That's for total aromatics. And this shows you that the reading for the benzene at this particular cooler at that time was about 0.37 ppm. And if we continue that measurement on to go to do a stell reading, then your stell increases with time as you approach the 15-minute time in a nice linear way, and then matches up with the initial reading. So the stell is calculated as the 15-minute, the concentration times the fraction of the 15-minute exposure, so that at 15 minutes they should equal. So if you're there for shorter than 15 minutes, then it will correctly indicate that you've not reached the stell limit yet. So this shows, well, let me see, we'll go over the accuracy. This is the same cooler sample right here. And so this was the result I just showed you of 0.37 ppm. And here's the cell reading 0.838 ppm, almost the same. The same gas was sampled by granular activated carbon, and the reading was again 0.38 ppm in that same cooler. We did the same kind of test on the standard mix that they prepared in the laboratory in the refinery of hexane, heptane, toluene, and benzene. And this mixture, we added 0.3 ppm benzene, and the readings came out 0.44. And we're not sure why they don't quite agree, but we suspect there's maybe a slight impurity in the toluene or the other solvents. But in any case, the activated carbon and the Tiger Select gave the same results. So whatever is there, it's really there, and we're getting readings that agree with the laboratory techniques. This is granular activated carbon, then subject to a gas chromatography that takes about an hour to do. There was another cal-gas mix that they use in the refinery to calibrate their gas chromatographs, containing 17 compounds, total VOCs of 212 ppm. And again, the activated carbon agreement's not perfect, but it's still reasonably close. The agreement between the Tiger Select and the activated carbon samples in an hour-long GC test after desorption of the benzene from the activated carbon. So those are spot measurements, and you can get STELs, but you get a single measurement. If you do need a continuous reading, we do have this Titan instrument that's recently come out. It's a fixed wall-mounted unit, techs down to 0.1 ppm. It needs no reagents, no gases or tubes, and you get semi-annual maintenance is what's required. So it's not a lot of maintenance. Not like you're going in there every day or anything, or every week to calibrate. You don't want to carry this around. It's pretty heavy at about 35 pounds, and it's got data storage for 2 years. Can sample remotely if needed. This is a test of the Titan selectivity to demonstrate how well this Titan works. If you take just a sample of gasoline with no added benzene, this is the reading we got. We got 100 ppm gasoline gave us about 1.1 ppm of gasoline, of benzene. And of course, we don't know if that's an accurate reading or not, if there's some suppression or interference going on. And so the only way to tell is to add a known amount of benzene. So we added small increments of 0.4 ppm benzene to this gasoline sample, and as you increase, you get this linear line. And if you do the same thing without any gasoline present, you get this line. The slope of these lines are the same, indicating that the gasoline components are not suppressing or somehow interfering with this measurement here. Because when you add a known amount of benzene, you get the same amount of increase in signal whether you have that gasoline present or not. This next slide shows you the importance of measuring continuously in monitoring situations, long-term monitoring situations. This is the benzene response over a 1.5 hour sampling period, where the typical way of doing this is to run a GC that runs about an hour of sample, and so it can only take a sample every once an hour. And in this case, the sample came right here, where you got just the leading edge of whatever this event was, so it gave it a low response. And then there's no more sampling in this time. Meanwhile, the Titan was monitoring, and the GC just misses these entire events simply because they can't sample all the time. So that's why some continuous monitoring does have some advantages. So just to put these in perspective in terms of the overall options for measuring benzene, I've listed here benzene-specific measurements with the detection limit near half a ppm. So these are not straight PID or FID, but things that measure benzene specifically around this half a ppm detection limit, or you need to be for hygiene measurements. You can use tubes, simple tubes with a hand pump. Some of them get down to about half a ppm. The cost is low, but it's just a single point. You need about 10 to 20 pump strokes to do this, so it takes a long time. And so that's really labor intensive. You can use an automatic tube system like the Draeger CMS. That goes about 10 minutes, less labor intensive, lower detection limit, a little bit higher cost, but again, it's a single point. This PID, like the Tiger Select, with a filter tube, you can get a sample reading in 1 to 3 minutes. The cost is, I'm sorry, the detection limit's about 0.1 ppm, and the cost is moderate. You're talking a few $1,000s for the instrument, whereas here you're talking maybe $1,000 or $2,000 for this unit. The portable GC, you're talking more like $15,000, $20,000 for this unit. Gets the same detection limit as but the sampling time again is 5 to 10 minutes. The Titan is continuous, somewhat continuous. The first one of these that can be continuous. The costs are intermediate. We're talking about $25,000 roughly per unit. Pretty good detection limits, and again, continuous. So a portable infrared detector will give you a short sampling time, be more continuous, but my understanding is that the best detection limits are only around 2 ppm, and so they're not quite good enough, and the cost is even a little bit higher. You can do an online GC, which a lot of refineries have. They're very accurate, but they're sort of semi-continuous, giving you a 1 hour turnaround time, and of course the costs are pretty high. You can take GA-activated carbon samples, send them off to a lab, and it takes you 1 to 10 days. Detection limits are excellent. That's the best way to get low readings, and the costs are fairly high, and that they're off-site, so it takes you quite some time to get a response. The portable ion mobility spectrometer, that's the portable mass spectrometer coming online recently. They're available. 10 ppb detection limits, fairly high cost, and they're not intrinsically safe, so you can't use them around a lot of refineries. At least the latest ones that I've been researching, I couldn't find one that's intrinsically safe. So those are some options, and that's where this portable tube filter comes in. Fairly low cost, reasonable detection limits, and it can actually now measure the cells going on continuously for 15 minutes or more if you don't have a high background. Thank you. I hope that answers everyone's questions or is informative.
All right, that was great. Thank you. All right, Werner, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. If anybody has any specific application questions, they can feel free to give me a call at 866-RENT-EHS or 866-736-8347. Let me get my slides up here. If you want to know more about the technologies we supply, please follow us on social media. I'll put out lots of good technical tips on my blog at raeco.rents.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. We do record all these training sessions, which you can find out on YouTube. If there are some topics you'd like us to cover in our webinars, please send me an email with the subject. We have access to lots of product and process specialists. Please let me know what we could cover. You can email me at matt@raecorents.com. Our next webinar topic will be presented by Randy Slags from 3M on IAQ monitoring made simple, Friday, April 7th at 9 a.m. I do have a couple questions coming up on the question screen that we can go through. Let's see. First one here. How often do you calibrate the PID for benzene sampling? Every sample or just daily?
Oh, no, it would be just daily. I'm not even sure that's necessary. You know, you could probably even get away with weekly if you're talking about the Tiger Select. Yeah. It's probably a good idea to do it if you use a new batch of tubes. So if you're ordering tubes, you get you know, 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 boxes from the same batch, then that's you know, you don't need to recalibrate. But if you in the middle of a day and you switch from one batch to another, then it might be a good idea to recalibrate, because there are slight differences from batch to batch that affect the response. But daily is certainly enough, and probably if you're using the same batch, or maybe even just weekly.
Okay, here's another one. Let's see if we can. It says, for the testing done to determine interference from other compounds, toluene, N-hexane, methane, etc., what concentration of benzene was used?
Okay, so in these cases, we simply we did 2 types of tests. One is to apply just the compound itself and see whether there's any reading. So we wanted to be sure that we weren't getting any kind of positive interference that might affect. So we didn't have any benzene present. We wanted to be sure we got a 0 reading. Okay. So that's what's reported in this table. We then also would check it with about 2 ppm of benzene present to see if there's any effect on that 2 ppm response. And in a few cases, noted with the asterisk, you could see that the readings were affected above a certain concentration. So typically those were done with 2 ppm as the benzene background concentration.
Okay. Let's see. What instrumentation would you recommend that could be given to a field person for screening tool, and then follow up with the benzene specific instrumentation?
Well, and pretty much any PID with a 10.0 EV lamp you could use. I showed earlier on in the talk the cub that's designed specifically for that purpose, where you just clip that onto your hard hat or your shirt pocket and let them walk around with that. So that little cub portable clip-on type PID is ideal for that purpose. Has a 10.6 lamp, has the 10.0 EV lamp, and thus has not very much interference from other hydrocarbons, so it's screening for aromatic components.
Okay, and then the last question I have is, can we get a copy of the slides? And yes, we'll be posting a copy of the presentation and the slides on our website in the next day or 2. So at this point, I guess there are no further questions. We'll conclude the presentation.
Can I add one more comment, I guess? I think it might be important to note about the humidity, that these tubes do contain acids, and so the tubes are not affected by humidity, so you can actually make measurements in steam, but don't do that very long, because if you can generate liquid acids that can then get sucked into the instrument, and that'll then damage the instrument. So the tubes turn sort of a dull orange color when they're saturated with humidity, and at that point you should stop using them. Okay?
Okay, perfect. All right, I want to thank Werner again, and we're going to go ahead and conclude the presentation. If there are any further questions out there, feel free to email me and we can touch base with Werner on some answers. All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, bye.